What is happening, super fans? You're listening to Behind the Mask, the show where we chat with your favorite superhero fiction authors about the worlds and the heroes they are writing. Behind the Mask is brought to you by superherofiction.com, which is the world's largest website dedicated to superhero fiction. I am your host, Franklin Kendrick, and today on the show, I am excited to be talking with author Trish Heinrich. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me for round two.
Oh, yes. I was really, I usually get nervous when I look to see who's next up, if it's somebody that I've never talked to or like encountered. But then when I saw that it was you, I was like, oh, good. All right.
That's always nice when you're like, all right, yeah, this is fine. I got this.
Yeah. So, my first question for you is different than my normal question since, well, you've been on the show before. So anybody who is listening now and who hasn't listened to the backlog, Trish was actually the first person who volunteered to be like the guinea pig on Behind the Mask. So you can find her first episode back in the season one, and it's still up there. So if you want to go back and listen. But this first question is usually about who you are when you're not writing, but I am sort of altering it a little bit because you chatted with me. You chatted with me sort of offline. I asked you like, what do you want me to ask? Is there anything different? So instead of asking you about who you are when you're not writing, I'm going to ask you about your current rebranding that you're going through. Who were you when you started writing superhero fiction? And then who are you, like, who have you evolved into since then?
That's a great question. I love how you phrased that. So when I started, I was totally all in for just some real straight up superhero novels. I had always loved the romantic aspects of superhero stories, but being a female in geek spaces, I very quickly learned that girl geeks are looked down upon, to say the least, if they like romance in their geekdom. And so I really tried hard to suppress that part of my storytelling. To fit in, I'll be very honest. I did it because I was like, you know what? I know there's a lot of guy readers in this genre. It's pretty heavily male dominated. And I didn't want to be the chick superhero author, And so I suppressed that romantic side of my storytelling quite a bit. And then last year, I had gone through, I'm now on my third set of covers for the original series because I just, you're an indie author and you don't know what you're doing. You try really hard, but when the first like 3, 4, or 5 years, you don't know what you're doing. You're learning. And I had realized talking to Jeremy Flagg, who does the Geekorama podcast with me, that my branding really was kind of wishy-washy. It was like, who are you? What are you selling? And so he and I talked it over. And the more that we talked, the more he was like, you sound like you really like romance. And I was like, well, yeah, but... And I really wanted to package myself as more of an urban fantasy superhero author, though. And so I decided to go with my initials for the urban fantasy because it's such a heavily male-dominated genre. And that really kind of perturbed me a little, but I did it anyway to kind of test it and see. And realizing that it didn't really make much of a difference, initials or going by my real name. And also throughout the course of rebranding that and figuring out what kind of an author I really wanted to be and realizing that I had really suppressed that more romantic side of my storytelling, I really did come to the realization that I really want to write more romance. And this was probably June or July of last year. And now I've made the decision to lean very heavily towards that. I will probably retire my urban fantasy series after I complete the second trilogy this fall, which kind of breaks my heart, but also I feel like I have to be really true to who I am as a storyteller. You know what I mean? Like, if I really want to write more kissing books, which I do, then that's what I need to do. That's what makes me happy. And so it sounds kind of like all over the place, but it really has been this journey of kind of unpacking the as an author and realizing, you know what, nobody gets to really tell me how to write superhero stories or how to be a geek. I can really like kissing books and lots of sex on the page with my superhero books, and I could still be a superhero author, and that's okay. And so that's really where the rebranding has led me, is to be a romance superhero author instead of an urban fantasy one. And it's so far it has been a very good fit. I'm very excited. I have, including the series that's launching this summer, I have 3 now superhero romance series ideas that I am starting to sketch out, which is very exciting.
Oh my gosh. It's really interesting to hear, everybody talks about like writing to market, find your niche, do all that research. Like I've seriously tried, like read a bunch of things. And it does get kind of stressful as an indie author because sometimes, like you said, you don't know, is it because my covers aren't good? Is it because my blurb is not up to par? Like it's such a moving target. And I think it's true. Like at the end of the day, you have to like honor what you're interested in. And like, yeah, it's a business, but it's art before it goes on sale. So I fully am supportive of like write what you feel like you need to do, because it eventually, I mean, most authors are doing it because they would much rather do it than a day job. But if you try to force yourself to write something that is not really in your heart, it's no different than like just going to a day job.
Well, and that's how it kind of started to feel. I wasn't excited about these stories anymore. And part of it was because I couldn't figure out why they weren't selling. And that is like not to get cold and heartless about the whole thing, but if you are running a business and you've done everything you can think of to try to sell a product and it's just not selling, you do have to, I think, come to a place where you're like, okay, this isn't working. And I do have, like, that first book, I've rewritten that blurb 20 times. I have every iteration of that blurb. And so I was talking with my husband today, in fact, and I said, look, I feel like I've done everything humanly possible that I can think of. And as a business person, I have to look at it and say, what is going to be better for my career as well. And it's nice when what's better for your career also lines up with how you as an artist function, the things that are, that really resonate with you as a storyteller. And I feel like that is happening, because the second I said, okay, I'll try romance, it was like uncorking a bottle. So much stuff started coming out. And I have all these great ideas, like these basically fanfic relationships that I have in my head, like my head canons that I never had time to write fanfic, but I'm like, you know what? I could tweak that and I can make that a romance novel. And I am like so excited.
That is like the most fun, is being like, oh boy, it's like effortless and something that you wanted to do. Now it's like, I didn't have time for it, but now it's like, this is the time.
Exactly. Now I can get paid for it, hopefully.
Yes. Goodness. So let me look at what do I have from us? Because it is different now that I'm like, oh, I've rewritten some of these. Okay. So can you talk? I know you said the new series is coming out in the summer. So can you talk about like what is this series going to be called, and maybe give a hint of what it's going to revolve around?
So it's called Silver City Heroes, the Celestial Superheroes. I think it's going to be called that. I'm looking at the romance genre and some of their like series subtitles and titles. I was like, wow, you just threw everything in there except the kitchen sink. That's amazing. But it's definitely, at the very least, it's going to be called the Celestial Superheroes. And I had this tiny reference in one of my superhero urban fantasy books about this organization that goes around hunting artifacts and storing them. So it's basically like Warehouse 13. I wanted a Warehouse 13 type series in my superhero universe. And I just, in one of the books, I mentioned them and then I let it go because I was intending to do a whole series. And when I started thinking about romance, I was like, well, what could I do? And I thought, well, what if there was an artifact that gave a guy angelic powers? We don't know why, it just happened. Okay, great, I'll do that. And so I wrote a short story for the superhero fiction romance anthology that's about the guy that he picked up this artifact, it gave him angelic powers, blah, blah, blah. And it's a prequel short story for the series. It kind of gave me the opportunity to hammer out like the world building. And my urban fantasy series, this is part of why I think they might not have worked, is because they were set in the past. So it's an alternate Earth past. But the romance books, I decided to move them forward in time. So they're all modern day, the same alternate universe. So it's all the same world. Superpowers exist. But this first book, because I also really want to tap into the paranormal romance readers, I feel like that would be a really good fit for me. I decided to go with angelic powers because that would be a really good fit, I thought. So the series follows the children of the guy we meet in that short story. So it's his kids, and it's 4 siblings, so 1 book for each sibling. And these kids, though, where their dad was fully like, his name was Archangel. So he was like 7 feet tall, golden breastplate, beautiful white wings. I mean, he was like a golden god. He looked like he was amazing. But the kids got rings infused with this broken up powerful weapon, and the weapon belonged to a fallen angel. And so 2 of the kids got the darker aspects of that fallen angel, the more grim, ugly, just kind of like not exactly angelic, but not exactly demonic. And then the other 2 kids got the full-on angelic parts of it. And most of the kids, they don't want it. These 4 siblings, out of all of them, there's only 1 that really wanted anything to do with these powers. And the first book really revolves around Nathan. And he's estranged from his family. At this point, his dad has disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to him, but his dad disappeared after the epic battle with the demonic villain Spectre. And so Spectre and his dad, their battle lasted for hours. It decimated a quarter of the city, and it was like this big deal. And the city is, known for their angelic heroes, to the point where they actually have a wing of the museum that's dedicated to like his dad. But he's so over it. He's like, the guy was an asshole. I fucking hate him. Like, he's just like, yeah, whatever. You can have your archangel. I know he was an asshole. And he's bitter because these powers were forced on him. He didn't want them, but now that he's got them, he feels like, well, I got to do something with them. And he's your typical bad boy, playboy of the city. He's got a new woman on his arm every night. He owns a nightclub. But he also goes out and he, kicks little demon butt every now and then as this really big, scary looking angelic guy. And he ends up falling in love with Tessa, who is, she's a reporter, but her career got torpedoed by her douche canoe of an ex-boyfriend. And so she's like, no more love. I'm focusing on my career. I don't need a man. Men are trouble. No more love. Nothing. And so, of course, they're going to fall in love. And they do, but they both have to really get past, like Nathan, he has some trauma in his past that really comes to a head with, there's a new villain in town, and it comes to a head with who that new villain really is and all of that. And Tessa has to get past her distrust. I mean, she was deeply betrayed by the last guy that she trusted. And so she has to get past that. But this guy, Nathan is known for having a new woman in his bed all the time. Like, how can she trust him? And so that's the dynamic going into this first book. And I'm really excited about it. I'm excited and I'm nervous. I've never written anything like this before, but it just feels very right.
Oh yes.
So
There's something about the bad boy characters where in your mind you shouldn't trust them.
yeah,
But your instincts are like, but I just am so drawn to them. Well,
yep.
so I love that trope where I mean I love a majority of romance tropes, let's be honest. Because once I spot them, it's not like other genres, I feel like, where when you spot the trope, you're bored because you're like, oh great, I know exactly where this is going. In
Yeah.
romance, you're like, I spotted the trope, and now how in the world does this play out? So it's
Well,
like it's the opposite
yeah.
of what usually happens.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up because I have been having to turn that part of my brain off because,
Mhm.
writing in superhero, like straight up just urban fantasy superheroes, you want to not have somebody be like, oh, here comes that trope. Like, and it's really
Mhm.
hard in superheroes because the whole genre is tropes. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like
yes.
the cape and the cowl and like the secret identities and all of that. And to be able to lean hard and obviously into a trope was so freeing. I didn't
Mhm.
have to figure out, well, and you do have to be creative about it, but you can also just play. Like, I
Oh yeah.
have a novella that it's up for free on my website. You can just sign up to my newsletter and you can get it. But I actually did the one bed in the motel room trope with it because I love that trope and I could do it now. And it's not an eye roll. It's like you could do something really fun with it. And I love that trope.
Oh yes, it's like you're not reinventing the wheel. You're just embracing the wheel and
Yes,
just putting whatever you want onto it.
exactly. And you know what? You can do it well. I mean, romance readers do not expect you to reinvent. In fact, they don't want you to reinvent anything.
Mhm.
They love that. And as long as you do, as long as you do it with intention and you don't just slap it on there. I mean, I think that most romance readers really love that stuff.
Oh
So
yeah, it's not like the overused oh boy, here we go, another sky beam, or
yeah,
oh boy, another destroyed city. Where in the sequel we're gonna have to watch everybody be like, how are we gonna rebuild this? No.
I know exactly. Well, and
Okay.
in my this first series, like there are parts of the city that never got rebuilt. Like
Mhm.
I specifically left them like that because it was just kind of like, yeah, I like the idea of showing the scars of some of that to some extent, and it kind of went with like the feel of the main character too, like Nathan kind of just being like, screw you all. I
Yeah,
don't like this
I'm move.
angelic stuff.
I'm moving on. I'm moving to a new
Yeah,
place. Forget this.
exactly.
Goodness. So, can you talk a little bit? I mean, you mentioned that it's modern day, but how much is it? Is it our Earth? Is it like a fictionalized Earth? How did you come up with what you wanted it to play inside?
So it's fictionalized. There are no, I think, except for, I think I did say Washington, D.C. at one point because I can't come up with another name for the
Mhm.
nation's capital. I'm just like, I'm just going to go with it. But most of the cities' names are completely different. Like this series will take place in Silver City.
Mhm.
And there are references, like if anybody has read any of my other books, there are clear references to the cities and even the people in those books. Like I named in the free novella, I actually named a law after one of my heroes. Um, because it's an interconnected world. So in the urban fantasy books, there's no laws yet about vigilantes or people with powers. But since I've moved it up in the timeline, there are now laws. And there are sanctuary cities that have been set up basically to be like, yeah, you can come live here as a powered person and, you know, have certain freedoms that you don't have other places. And so I really thought about, okay, you know, let's say 40, 50 years after supers first appear, what would be some of the logical structures that would have sprung up to contain them, to regulate them? So one of the things is that this government agency, well, if you let me back up. If you exhibit powers, you have to have, there's a grading system. So there's like a 5 is the least powerful, all the way up to a 1. And so you have to register. I totally took that straight from the X-Men. I no shame. You have to register. And if you are a 3 or higher, and you're like a teenager, then the law states that you need to be sent to a special powered school. So it's basically a school with other powered kids. So you don't injure kids that don't have any powers, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that and then you register, and then this government agency kind of monitors you. And if you're super strong, they kind of rope you into service for several years. And so it is kind of like you lose some of your autonomy a little bit.
ROTC. Yeah, come on.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, that is a threat in this first book. Like, Celestials are like, they're not born with powers. Like, these siblings, they weren't born with powers. They get them from an artifact. So the family, what they ended up doing is they ended up basically telling the government, we don't fall under these rules, so you're going to leave us alone. So they exist outside of those rules, which I use that as a little bit of conflict in the book. Like, the government really doesn't like that. And in order to stay out of their clutches, they kind of have to keep their noses clean. So, for a bad boy like Nathan, that's kind of, it's not real happy with that. So that's kind of what I did in these romance series. Is I tried to take the logical path. What would a government do to regulate superheroes? So.
And they would.
Yeah, they would. They would.
It's like everybody is always like apologetic for falling into certain things, and I'm like, but that is what would happen. Like,
it is, yeah. It would be worse than what I wrote, actually.
Yeah. It would be like, you're not free. We're using your abilities as much as we possibly can.
Exactly.
Goodness. So let me ask you a little bit about what inspired you when you decided that you were going to work on this new series. What is something that you maybe turn to get like inspiration, or maybe something that made you say, yes, this is like, I want to do this myself?
Well, as far as other authors that inspired me, Lana Prachechnik, I cannot pronounce her last name.
Prachechnik. I had to, yes.
Okay.
I could see it. I had to be like, how do you pronounce that?
Yes, exactly. Like, she really inspired me with her Deadly 7 series. It's a straight up superhero romance. It's about a family. I think there's 7 siblings, which I was like, I'm not tackling something that big. What she did, and I originally tried to do this and I was driving myself crazy, so I just decided to drop it. But she has interwoven like every one of their antagonists, and each book is building towards this confrontation with this overarching big bad. And there's some really steamy, wonderful romance in it. And I was like, I want to do that. That looks like fun. This first series does not have an overarching big bad, because every time I tried to do it, I just got lost in the weeds. And I thought, you know what? It's fine. They can each have their own villain. It doesn't have to interconnect. Their sibling, that's what makes it, a series. It'll be fine. But also, I really, really, really love the television show Lucifer. And so when I was kicking around ideas for this, I thought, I want to write a book with a Lucifer type main character, because I love, love, love male romantic protagonists that are like the wounded type. And sometimes they're broody, but sometimes they're like Lucifer, who has this carefree, drink all the time, sleep with all the women, everything is great, outward persona that's really hiding some very deep wounds. And that's the kind of hero that I wanted to write. And that's who Nathan is. Very much straight up. I mean, his nightclub's called Inferno, for crying out loud. I was not subtle about this at all.
I want to go there.
I know. So I would say those are the two really big inspirations for me.
That's awesome. I really enjoy inspiration from TV because whenever I watch something that I really enjoy, it's the like such a mass consumer type of medium for like visual like movies and TV. But like as a writer, the shows and movies that I love, I'm always wanting to know like what's going on inside those people's heads.
Yep,
What are they thinking? Like because all unless they give you a voiceover, you really don't know.
it's
So
true.
it's like it's a different way of like unlocking part of your like creative brain to be like I'm gonna. And usually people like when you start out, like for me specifically, like you write fan fiction as a way to like learn how to do it, and
Yep.
then you're able to create your own characters in your own worlds, and you're like I'm off and running.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me see what. Okay, my next one is a long one. Okay, I rewrote this question. Okay, so you are from the whole rebranding talk and the starting a new talk. You're in a position that I feel like a lot of authors find themselves in eventually, or maybe not even eventually, like accidentally, but they don't like to admit it out in public, where they probably started their journey where they were writing one thing and then they decided for whatever reason to just basically start from scratch and write something different. So can you talk a bit about what it's like to face that hurdle as a writer, and maybe how you viewed starting over?
That is a great question. I it's hard. I don't give up on things easily. Things or people. I don't. I mean, I really have to feel like I have wrung every ounce of possibility out of something before I let it go. I was an actress before I had kids, and I tried to keep that career going through my first child. And then when I had my second child, it really did hit me that I couldn't keep this going. I had to make a really hard decision, but I was okay with walking away because I knew that I had given it everything I had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how I feel about um, the urban fantasy part of my writing life is, I gave it everything I had. It's not like it didn't sell the first, year. So no, I'm done with it. Like these books have been out a while. I even did a relaunch. I pulled them off the market. I re-edited them. I rewrote them. Like I said, this is the third set of covers these books have had. I'm in the middle of doing audiobook production, which I am going to end up finishing, but I thought that might breathe some new life into it too, because I had heard some other authors say that, you get just a different audience in there with audiobooks, and it really hasn't done anything. So for me, it's sad. I mean, these books will always be special to me because they're what got me into this career path. I will always love those books, and I don't consider them a failure. I think that a lot of people see failure as this big awful thing, like, oh, I failed at this, and it's like, I think of failure more as a learning opportunity, and I know that sounds really trite, but it's more about, okay, I didn't necessarily fail here. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? What did I get out of this? And honestly, I got out of it that I wasn't writing the right books. It got me writing, it got me learning publishing, it got me on this path. So I can't look at it and say this was a failure. It wasn't. It was a success in the sense of it taught me a lot, and it helped me find what I should have been doing. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at it, is just it's reframing it. And I'm constantly having to remind myself of that because it does hurt. You put something you love out there, and then you have to admit, you have to walk away from it. But I think if I can just keep remembering that this wasn't a failure. It was something that just didn't work, but it still taught me a lot, and I actually got a lot out of it. And there are people that contact me all the time and say how much they love those books, and that's great, and I love that.
Mhm.
So I created something that means something to other people. How many people can say that? You know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah.
yes, I have to walk away from it, but that doesn't, there's a lot of good that came out of doing that. And a lot of good, I hope, that comes out of pivoting too. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I it is something that I feel like a lot of writers, even myself, I've gone through this where you do something and like we want like we're always accused of like you want the instant gratification of something just like taking off. And it's like, yeah, of course we do.
Yeah.
Like anybody that creates something wants to see an audience come to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not without like it's always a work in pro like there's always forward movement, even if like so you finish out this series and then you move on to a next one. It's never there's no point in your writing career, I feel like, for anybody that's out there listening that is either a writer now that is giving a stab at it or wants to give a stab at it. There is no point, and like I'm such a small fry, and I'm going to tell you straight up that there is no point where you're going to sit back and say, well, I'm here, like I
Yeah.
made it, like because
No.
if that was the case, Stephen King would have published it and then been like, well, I'm done and there's nothing else that I'm
Exactly.
going to do. Or like any of the other big name writers, like they're doing it because there's always going to be more. So
Mm-hmm.
I look at it that way. Like eventually, like even a long running series, like I've seen authors that have like a 25 book series that are like,
Oh yeah.
well, I guess I've got like 4 books more and then I'm done with this. And I'm like, 29 books
I
and
know.
now you're done.
I
Okay.
know. Well,
So
and my acting teacher used to say that there are no overnight successes. He's like, the
no.
people that you see that everybody's like an overnight success, nobody talks about the 10 years or 12 or 20 years of learning and slogging away and waiting tables. And it's the same thing for writing. Like, I am really sick and tired of hearing the stories of so and so published her first book and it became an Amazon bestseller. Stop telling those stories. If any
Yeah.
podcasters are out there listening, stop telling those stories
Yeah.
unless you are willing to also divulge the fact that they slaved for 10 years under a different pen name and gutted
Mhm.
that out and learned a lot of hard lessons, or the fact that they were somebody's PA for 6 years and met
Mhm.
all these authors who then shared their first book. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Like, pull back the curtain and show us the man, the almighty Oz, show us the real story. Don't just tell us
Mhm.
the unicorn.
Yeah. It does get to be a little disheartening and but the books will always be there for somebody who does want to read them. Like I feel like
Yep.
that is a takeaway. Even in this digital age, like it's easy for stuff to get deleted, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot easier for stuff to stick around. So
Yeah.
there's no reason that if somebody you never know what books are going to resonate with an audience. So who's to
Mm-hmm.
say if the next series that you embark on doesn't attract people back to the series that is finished, which I assume
Yep.
they're not getting taken down. Hopefully.
No. I am definitely still keeping them up. Absolutely. I'm just not like the email list for that. It's stagnant right now because I
Mhm.
really haven't done anything to grow it. And I'm just gonna after the next book, the sixth book, that comes out to finish that trilogy. After that happens, I am just going to let them know this is it for the urban fantasy. I'm not going to really nurture that list, but they're still going to be up. Like,
Mhm.
they're not going anywhere. And there's definitely some cross pollination between paranormal romance readers and urban fantasy. So,
Mhm.
um, that's still definitely a possibility. I'm sure I will still get sales, but it's just, I can't, from a business standpoint, I have to look at how am I spending my time? And am I spending my time in a way that is netting me profits? And I really had to take a long, hard look at that because I don't have a personal assistant. I have 2 kids
Yeah.
at home. You know what I mean? Like I don't have a lot of time.
You're the personal assistant for them.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast this week, Lucy Score, and she's a huge contemporary romance writer, and she was telling the podcaster about the people that she has working for her. And it's, I don't begrudge any author, anybody that has a staff, go you. But the stuff that she was talking about, I was like, oh God, I do all of that myself. No wonder I am exhausted. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah.
So
Oh,
I
yeah.
had to figure out, like, if I'm not going to be writing those books anymore, like if they're not making me money, then I need to redirect my time resource and my money resource towards the series and the writing that is going to be making me money. And so that's really what it came down to for me in terms of stepping away from there. It was like, okay, I have finite amount of time and money. I have to redirect it now. So, but they're still going to be up on Amazon. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So I have, this one is not on my list, but I'll ask because I'm just prompted by. So
okay.
Did you outline and plan your full next series at once, or are you sort of like going book by book? Because I'm always curious, like when someone is like, yeah, I have X number of books planned, I always wonder, like, did you outline all of them at once? Like, how do you do this?
So I learned some hard lessons from my urban fantasy, which I did not plot out. I kind of went, wee, willy, 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 and I regretted that. And I also knew that if I was going to do a romance series, like I had to have some kind of connecting thread there. Like for some people, it's the same town or the same family, and at the time, Jeremy was going to launch Cover Villain, so he's like, well, if you know your books, let me know and I'll do some mock-ups. And, you know, he was like really just kind of wanting to play around. So that got me thinking. I was like, well, what could I do? And I did do loose sketches. So I knew I sketched out the characters, like who were the siblings. I knew I wanted at least one woman. So there's 3 boys and 1 girl. Who got what ring. So it was Nathan, my protagonist of this first book, and the girl got the darker rings and the other 2 boys got the lighter ones. And because with romance, generally speaking, like it doesn't happen every time, but a lot of the ones that I personally like, they'll give you a little sneak peek, like a sample chapter or something of the next book. And so I thought, well, I have to know who my next book couple is going to be. So if I have to have that, then I kind of have to know like what's their wounds, what's kind of the general feel of the next book. And so I did go and sketch out like what wounds do these characters have? What is going to be like their goal in this book? And one of them has changed a little bit. Like I actually switched what was going to be book 2 and 3. Like I switched them because as I'm writing book 1, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense because this character's here. And so I switched it and now it's fine. So I've done stuff like that, but it was easy to do because nothing was published. I didn't, I could do that. But yeah, I have rough sketches. I know the characters. I know roughly the plot. But one thing I am doing that I really haven't done before, honestly, I've tried and tried. It never worked for me, but it's really working well now, which I think is a good sign. I am outlining the romance part of the story. I'm using Romancing the Beat, which is like the gold standard of romance writing books. And I am writing out the romance beats for the next book. And that's something that I didn't really do with this first book. I was still kind of on the, like thinking very superhero-like. So I was putting the superhero aspects first and the romance second. And I had to completely rewrite everything top to bottom, like twice.
Oh, wow.
because I was relearning how to write. And essentially, like not like the basics, but it was the romance has to come first. The romance is primary. and I had to teach myself how to do that. It's a different way to write. I felt like, for me. And now I'm into it. And so as I'm plotting the second book, I'm thinking romance first. So everything externally, like with the superhero aspect, comes second to the romance.
Mm-hmm.
And so this time around, I'm making sure I have all those romance beats. I've got them locked in. I know where the relationship is going, even if it ends up changing during the course of drafting, which it probably will. And then I can plop in the superhero underneath that. I can interweave it, and that's really how, for me anyway, how my process is starting to kind of fall out. So yeah.
Do you find, so I've looked into like the pre-built, like the 3-act structure and all that jazz, like the hero's journey and all that stuff. Do you find the romance plot beats, do you find them like liberating, or do you like fight against them sometimes?
No, I find them completely liberating. I've read Save the Cat. I'm a huge fan of K.M. Weiland. I
Oh
have
yeah.
all of her books, honestly, and I have tried every single one of her books to use for outlining methods. I couldn't do it. I've read Libby Hawk's Take Your Pants Off, which is kind of
Oh
more
yeah.
of a free form one. I couldn't do it on any of them. But for whatever reason, romancing the beat, I'm like, oh, I get this. I can do this. I got that. It just resonated with me. And I think that was when it really clicked, like, for me. And it's funny because that was back in December after I'd already made the decision to kind of do this. But it really became like, oh, wow, this moment for me of this is making more sense than trying to outline those other books. And so I do feel like it has set me free in a lot of ways. Like I can outline that one now, baby. I got it, but ask me to do Save the Cat and I'll be like, no.
Yeah, there's so many moving pieces in the superhero genre where you have to remember, I feel like it's so much like writing a weird like sitcom in a way where you're like, you gotta have an A plot, and it's like the A plot I've got, and you're like, what about the B plot? And you're like, B plot? What?
Well, because you have to have, like, what's the villain's plot? Like, what do they want?
Yeah.
How are they going to get it? And then how is the hero? And
Yeah. What's the villain's plot? Is he good enough? He or she good enough? What, like, it all has to thematically weave into. So, like, I appreciate all of the writers who are able to do it. It's that make it look super easy and do like 5 books a year or whatever it is. But holy moly, like I feel like every superhero book is like a massive undertaking. So it's nice to hear that the superhero romance is a little bit like quicker and easier to do.
I hope so, because this first book has taken me months just to do. Like a final draft to send to my editor has taken months, and I know that's because I'm relearning how to do it. Romance has very specific plot points. It's very specific things that you have to do, like any genre. And so I've switched genres. I've learned how to write superhero urban fantasy. This is very, very different. So it was drafting this first book that sets up this whole new world, which, I mean, first books in series they have to achieve so much. So I'm doing that, but I'm also learning an entirely new genre. And so, I mean, I set myself a pretty high bar, and then I get down on myself when I don't hit it out of the park, like right away. It's just how I function. It's very masochistic. But I really feel like I'm looking at the second book and I'm like, okay, I think this is going to go quicker because I've got a better handle on the genre now, and it's clicking with me. Whereas this last superhero book, urban fantasy book that I really do have to write, I left my readers on a cliffhanger on the last one. So I have to finish this trilogy. Like I really do. I'm giving myself a good 6 months to get that thing out, because not only is it wrapping up a lot of plot threads, but I know now it takes me a long time to write those books. for the reasons that we've talked about. And so I'm hoping the romance will be quicker. I haven't seen that yet, but I'm hoping it will.
Yes, at least it won't feel so much like I don't know about you, but like I always get to the points where I just literally am like at the halfway point. I'm like, how in the world do I get from the halfway to the end? But I feel like with the romance beats, like you know where it's going to go because it's like it's got the same sort of flow every time where like you know the end point. There's no like question about what the ending is going to be unless you're writing a only a happier for now or whatever it's called. Like they're always going to end up together, but it's more like how are they going to make it? But in a regular like traditional superhero book, it's always like there's going to be a battle, and then I'm like, okay, what is this battle going to be? This is so open-ended. I have no idea how to get from the midpoint to the end to make it feel satisfying, and you second guess yourself.
Well, and with superheroes, like you have to give them. I learned this the hard way with my first book, which I had to rewrite the ending because I got so many complaints. And I still get complaints, but not quite the same. But you need to give the audience like this smackdown, right? You got to give them that battle that everything has been building towards. But if you're writing a series and you're using the same villain the whole series, you also can't have the villain be caught. Or if you do, you're going to have to orchestrate the most epic prison break in the next book or something, or some way to hook them into that next book. And that was the hardest balance in that very first superhero book I wrote, because it wasn't a cliffhanger. Like, I don't feel like it was. There was resolution, but there were then a lot of things within the resolution. There were so many questions unanswered because it's the first book. And people were pissed. They were like, there's no epic battle. I'm like, what are you talking about? The heroine practically died.
Yeah.
Like, how is that not epic?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to predict what someone's going to be like. Well, I feel like sometimes when something is successful, like a successful ending, like I want to know what percentage of times you were just throwing things at the wall and you're like relieved that it was well received. But like when I plan something that I think is going to be great, it's like you said, where you think it's amazing, and like maybe like the beta readers or test readers think it was amazing, but then the wider audience is just like, this is it, this is all there is, and you're like, what? Yes, like, oh my gosh, I just killed myself for this.
I know, and that first book's almost 100,000 words, and I'm like, you just have you have the monster of all superhero novels, and you're going to complain to me that the villain got away? Shush now.
Of course they get away. The Joker always gets away.
It's like it's a trilogy, people.
yeah. You have to, even when you prep them, they're like, no, I want the next one immediately because I will not take any cliffhanger.
Well, and now that's fine because they're all three are out. You can binge read them to your heart's content.
Yes. So let me ask you this question. So since your next series isn't out yet, you can be vague. Maybe you can't answer this question at all. I don't know. But without going into really spoilers, do you have a favorite maybe plot thread that came to you that you were like, yes, this is what I gotta like write this down immediately, or something that really surprised you as you were plotting and drafting that maybe doesn't give anything away, but you can kind of like, when you get to it, readers, you'll know that's what I was talking about.
That's a great question. I think it was more about the individual characters as I developed them. Like, for instance, this really isn't giving anything away, but the last book in the series is about the oldest brother, and I could not nail that guy down. I was like, okay, I've got all the three of the other siblings. Who is this guy? And I knew I wanted him to be the sibling that the other three were just like, he's perfect. We hate him. Like, and to have that be like a burdensome part of his character. It's like, it's hard being the perfect kid. You know, you have that burden on you. Everything is writing on you. And I was like, but I have no idea who this guy is. And then I stumbled upon, so the whole thing with the dad is nobody knows what happened. He had this really big battle. He was wounded by Spectre. And then like a year later, he disappears. And it's not like he died. There's no body, like nobody knows what happened to him. And in the family, even, it's a mystery. So nobody is quite sure, what's going on. Their mom has been really tight-lipped about it for the past several years, but it comes out that the oldest brother really does know what's going on. And it's a guilt, like he's carried this guilt around with him for years. And the reason he's not around, the reason that he travels the world is he's trying to figure out how to fix it. And when I came up with that, I was like, ding, 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 that's perfect. Because he's lived his entire life with this expectation of, well, he's the perfect son. He's the one that gets it when all the other siblings don't. He's the inheritor of his father's legacy, and then when his father needs him the most, he fails. And it's just like, oh, shit, and I was like, oh, wow, I could write the crap out of that. And then I'm trying to figure out who would be a good fit for him as a romantic interest. And I came up with some, and I'm like, I was thinking maybe old high school sweetheart. I'm like, it's okay, but it's not really fitting me. And then I was like, what if it's an older woman? What if it's a woman that's like 10 years? I mean, 10 years is not a huge age difference, but usually you don't see that with a woman being the older one. And I thought, what if it's an older woman, sometime in the past, like they had an affair and he feels kind of guilty about it. And now her and her husband are separated, but, and he's never forgotten her. And I was like, oh, okay, now, there we go. And now I'm super excited to get to that book. I have to write the other three first, and which I'm also very excited to write because they're very interesting characters. But I think when I stumbled onto that, I was like, okay, now I know this guy. Now I can plant all these breadcrumbs. Great. I was just really super excited about that. So.
Oh my gosh. Planting the seeds in the previous books is like half the battle, I feel like, for and especially for romance, where like even recently I've been reading some romance books, and the cameo characters, they're never just there just because.
No.
They're always there because in the future you can expect something to happen. And it's like, I'm such a sucker for it. Like even when I watched some TV shows that have like heavy romance themes, I'm just like, I know. I know that I hate you now, but you are going to have a story that I'm going to be addicted to in the future. And it always happens. So,
exactly. No, and I did that. Like the main female character in this first book has a roommate, Alexis. She's a bounty hunter. And Alexis isn't in the book too much, but when she is, she's like hard drinking, sleeps with a new guy, every week. Like, she can't be nailed down. She names her possessions. So her guns are Thelma and Louise. Her ugly ass vintage car, if it's a puke green color, is called Betty. And her motorcycle is Veronica. So she like names her possessions, and she drinks a lot. And she's actually going to be like, I love this character. She was going to be a one-off. I didn't even plan on doing anything with her. And then I was like, she'd be a great love interest for the brother for the third book. And I was like, yes. And then it just all kind of clicked. I was like, okay, here we go. So like I love using the side characters like that because I end up falling in love with one or two of them anyway. And so the opportunity to write their stories is just baked into the genre. And I absolutely love that.
It's perfect. That's so exciting. So I'm winding. I don't want to. I'm winding down to the end of my question. So I'm like, okay, well, this question doesn't really apply. You basically spent the whole time talking. I'm not going to ask you what readers can expect. If you don't know what to expect by this point, go back and start from the beginning and listen. So, I'll ask you this next question instead.
Okay.
If somebody is brand new, like they are just listening to this and they are finding out about you for the first time, would you recommend that they go back and read your first series before? I mean, obviously there's some time, like if between now and when your next first book comes out, would you say yes, go read those, or would you say if you're really here for the romance, hold off? I know it's like a trick question because it's like, yeah, of course you want everyone to read everything, but or maybe even I'll add another spin is I forget now. Do you have to read all of your 6 books in order, or is there one that you'd say read this one first?
You don't. So there is romance in there. It's very slow burn. There is generally no sex on the page. They get right up to the moment, and then it fades to black. Because that's the other thing I'm learning is how to write sex scenes. I haven't been comfortable with that, but much like fight scenes, I taught myself how to write really good fight scenes, so I know I can learn how to write sex scenes. I'm not too worried about that. But there's a lot of slow burn romance, and honestly, my favorite romance, and it's probably because it was my first, is in the Rise of Heroes trilogy. There is a love triangle, although I personally think I handled the love triangle very well. I don't see it as an eye roll, cringeworthy kind of love triangle. And it is resolved in the 3rd book. And so that first trilogy really does lay the groundwork of a lot of world building in terms of where do the powers come from, the secret organization, the Bulwark. I think it's mentioned in that one, but the Bulwark is the government agency that kind of handles super people, and they are mentioned a lot in the romance series. So I'm trying to think. If you really want a good look at them, I would say read Fahrenheit's Ghost, which is the first book in the Heroes of High Tide. There is a romance in there. It is not a happily ever after. They don't end up together. I'm just going to warn everybody right now. So if you're wanting romance, it's got HEA. That's not the book for you. So yeah, if you want a little bit of like world building backstory, the Fahrenheit's Ghost is the one I would recommend. But if you're wanting more of like romance and superheroes and you just can't wait, I would suggest reading the Rise of Heroes trilogy, because that one does have a lot of romance in it, and according to my readers, a very satisfying conclusion in the 3rd book. I cried when I wrote it, actually.
That's how you know as a writer when it gets to you. That's like, I feel like that's like real. It's like the inspiration just flows through you. Like you're like you're channeling something that. And you're like, I can't even believe, like it's coming, it's partly coming from you, but it's also like, I feel like it's something out there that's just waiting for you to put it on the page. So,
yeah, it's almost like there's like something getting funneled into your mind. Like,
yeah,
when it flows, it does feel very like otherworldly.
Yeah, because you get to that and you're like, did I really do that? Is that really from my own brain? Like,
how did I write that? That's a good sentence.
Yeah, really. I will add one more thing because you did mention earlier, and I'll just reiterate that you said that the prequel short story for your series is in the anthology.
Yes.
So if you're looking for a teaser for that, I would say go pick up. It's called Beneath the Mask. I know we've talked about it on a couple other podcasts so far, but it's out there. So if you want specifically a taste of this next world, go read the story in that, and then you'll be ready to go, because it's exclusive. You can't get it anywhere else.
You can't, actually. And if you love that, then there is a novella. There's 2 side characters that are in the very beginning, like within the first 10% or so of the new book coming out. There's 2 side characters that are in that I wrote a free novella about. And it's the one with the one bed in the motel room, and it's a bodyguard falling in love with the person he's protecting kind of story. So it's like, it's got all the buttons.
I'm there for that.
It's called Sinful Devotion, and it is free if you sign up to my newsletter. And as just another little carrot, I have decided that only newsletter subscribers are going to know the exact release date of the books. They're not really going up for a long pre-order, maybe 3 days, just to make sure they're live on the right date. But only subscribers are going to know the release date. So that's, yeah, just a one little added little bit of a bonus if you're a subscriber. So
that's awesome. So you have no excuse to not subscribe. Just go do it. I still, to this day, I know a lot of people out on the internet talk about like, oh, I have so many subscriptions to things. But I will tell you right now, there are a few writers that I follow, and they don't publish as much as they used to. But when I get that stupid email that says, oh yeah, my new book is out, like, I'm so excited to get that, because there's no other way to know. How else? Amazon is terrible about letting you know that something is coming out. So
seriously, there's a handful of authors that I will stalk online. Like, when is your next book coming out? Give it to me now.
Oh yeah, especially the people that put up the progress bars. I'll go back to their website and be like, what? Oh, it's like 2% more today. Oh yeah,
I know.
Get to the end.
I do get a little angry, like if they're right, like if I have a favorite series of theirs, I'm like, why aren't you writing in this series? Why are you publishing in that other one? Get to work.
Do it. Come on. Don't you know what we want? Come on now.
Exactly.
Oh, good. I know that now I'm not the only one that's like, please, just like give me a lot more of this.
Oh no, you're not.
So before I get to the very end, my last real traditional question for you is there anything that I have not asked you that you would like to talk about?
Not really. I mean, there's always superherofiction.com, which I'm so proud to be associated with. I'm so proud to work with Jeremy and you and Krista on. I just think that we built something really exciting over there. In June, we have our second annual convention, which we have rebranded and renamed, and all of that information is going to be put up on the website very shortly. We have some great panels. We're starting to get some really good people that are going to be doing some really exciting things, and I can't wait to talk about it. But that is going to be June 21st through the 26th, I want to say. Basically Monday through Friday, the second to last week in June. And but yeah, if anybody's listening to this and they really want more superhero fiction, head on over there. There is literally like something for everybody. There's almost 500 books on there. Like, if you can't find something on that website that you want to read, then that's really sad.
I go there sometimes just to look and see, and like there will be things just on the homepage that I've never seen before. So the covers are all like beautiful, and it's sorted by genre. So if you know specifically what type of superhero stuff, it's pretty accurate. So I second that, and I say definitely go check it out, because you're sure to find something. And especially if you have like Kindle Unlimited, or there's a lot of books that are like the first in the series that are like 99 cents. So it's a no-brainer. I love digital. Like, I'm such a hoarder of digital media.
Oh my God. My Kindle library is insane. It is.
Oh yeah.
It's just insane. Like, I borrow books and I forget. I literally went through it because I got a new Kindle for my birthday, and I was like, I forgot I borrowed this one. Like, there's like half a dozen books, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to get to this. I totally forgot I have it.
Oh yeah, and I love how it just keeps your place. Even like stuff that I haven't read for like 6 months, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's where I was. Wow, no sticky notes, nothing like falling out of them. So yeah, as from a book hoarder, it's such a godsend. I love digital books.
But I think that's really it. Like, I love superhero fiction, and we've got a community now in Discord, which is just totally crazy. Like, I mean, when Remy is like, let's just give it a shot, I was like, okay. And it's growing so fast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually liking it better than Facebook, and I feel bad about that. I don't want to abandon our authors on Facebook, but there's a lot of times I'm just like, Discord is so simple and it's so straightforward and there's no drama.
Oh yeah, you have the ability to have like just conversations with people in real time is so
Yeah.
refreshing compared to having comment conversations on Facebook posts where it's like, oh sorry, I didn't see this answer. Whoops, like 2 days later, like, oh yeah, I just totally left you hanging. Whoops.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess like that would be the only thing that I would want to mention. So if anybody's listening, like the Discord, to join Discord is also, that link is also on the homepage. And come on over. We talk about movies, television, comic books. We geek out about everything.
Oh yes. And you know, there's plenty, even now that the TV world is sort of catching up with everything and like and people are finally publishing again now that they are publishing all their stuff that they wrote during quarantine. Like there's plenty to discuss. So
yeah.
you're sure to find somebody, if you're somebody like me who when you are with your general acquaintances and friends where you try to have conversations about super nerdy things, they're just like, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're gonna find somebody who knows what the heck you're talking about.
Yes, it's actually kind of funny. Like there's obscure things that'll get brought up, and somebody's like, "Oh, I know that," and I'm like, "What? Okay, that's cool."
Oh yeah. So there is that for everybody listening. And before I close it out, I want to ask you, where can readers find you online if you want to be found? And then also, where can they find your books?
So you can find me and my books at trishheinrich.com. They're all there, and you can also sign up for the newsletter. You can also find me on Instagram at Trish Heinrich. Facebook, I have an author page, and I also have a reader group. It's small, but you know, every once in a while there'll be some really good conversations in there. It's called the Vigilante Heartbreakers, and you can join that. And then I'm also every other week. I am on the Geekorama podcast with Jeremy Flagg, although not this week. My husband guest hosted.
Ooh.
Yeah, so they talked New Mutants.
Oh boy.
Because I don't read comics. I don't really read comic books, and my husband does, and so I was like, you two should talk about X-Men. So.
Oh yes. I'm sure that would be a blast.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it actually. But anyway, those are the places you can find me and my books. My books are all on Kindle Unlimited on Amazon. They are in ebook, paperback, and Fahrenheit's Ghost and Serpent's Return are also in audiobook. And very soon, fingers crossed, Shadow's Torment will be out in audio. And then I also have 2 other books that my narrators are recording as we speak. So all the audiobooks should be out soon.
Excellent. Oh, goodness. So whatever your flavor of storytelling, the listeners out there, you know where to go, you know how to find everything.
Yep.
So
no excuses.
There's no excuses. I love being able to be like, oh, you have a website. Yes, I'm gonna go there and see what you post. Oh, you have a blog. Yes, I love to read behind the scenes info about your writing process. So yeah. But before I wrap it up, I just want to thank you so much for being on a second time. And
yes, absolutely.
It is always very fun, and I can talk forever, but that's why I have a list. So I don't. For anybody that's listened so far in this podcast, they know that I'm always like, this one's not on my list, but I always have to like go back on the rails and be like, okay.
Yeah.
So
Remy and I have a script. We try to follow it. It's hard.
Yes, it's important. So,
yes.
So I will wrap this one up for the listeners out there. Just reminding you, if you liked Behind the Mask, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the future episodes. And as always, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you all, whether you are new or old to the podcast. And I will see you all next time.